What's up, you guys? I'm Tony Metro. Welcome to the video. Today, I'm going to be giving a grade for every MLB team this offseason. So even though it's been a little slow, this has definitely been one of the busiest off seasons that I can remember. We've had a lot of players change teams, some big trades, some big free agent signings, and now I'm ready to hand out the grades for the offseason. And before I go any further, if you like this video, you want to stay up to date on all the latest MLB news, be sure to subscribe to my channel and leave this video a like. And if you don't like it, then why don't you like me? Okay, let's get started with the National League East. So, Mets fans entered the offseason with high hopes and expectations, finally out from the iron fist that was the Wilpon regime. The Mets were rumored to be interested in JT Realmuto, George Springer, and even Trevor Bauer. And they were considered the likely landing spot for not only one, but probably two of those names. But instead, the Mets signed catcher James McCann and brought in Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco via trade. They also signed reliever Trevor May, as well as Albert Almora Jr., Jonathan VR, and a few other low-key names. All in all, the Mets had a solid offseason, but they left a little bit to be desired from me as a Mets fan. For me personally, I still have a concern about the defense in center field as well as at third base. Now, the offseason isn't done. The Mets are still rumored to be interested in making a big trade for a third baseman or maybe another starting pitcher. But as of right now, I gotta give the Mets a B for this offseason. The Atlanta Braves are getting a B from me this offseason. The Braves added starting pitchers Charlie Morton and Drew Smyly. And they also retained left fielder Marcell Ozuna, who had an MVP type season for them last year. Overall, the Braves are bringing back largely the same team that blew a 3-1 lead to the Dodgers in the NLCS last year. But there's nothing wrong with that. The Braves have a solid starting rotation that now also includes Drew Smyly and Charlie Morton. They play tremendous defense all over the field, and they have a lineup that can kill you by 1,000 paper cuts or just bulldoze you with home runs. Expect the Braves and the Mets to duke it out for supremacy in the National League East this year. Next up, the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm giving them a C. After spending stupid money the last couple years by signing Bryce Harper and Jake Arrieta, signing JT Realmuto this offseason was almost impossible. Now, the Phillies did do that, and they brought him back, so congratulations to them. They also brought back Didi Gregorius. But other than that, this is largely the same team last year that finished 5 games under 500, and the same team in 2019 that went 81-81. Last year, the Phillies bullpen had the worst statistical ERA in baseball history, and their answer to fixing that was Archie Bradley, Matt Moore, and Chase Anderson. Re-signing Realmuto and Gregorius were great moves for the Phillies this offseason, but in my opinion, it was just the bare minimum. Next up, I'm giving the Miami Marlins a D. The Marlins have basically done nothing this offseason. They picked up Starling Marte's $12.5 million option for the team, and they signed reliever Anthony Bass. They also traded for Adam Simber from the Cleveland Indians. 2020 was a fluke in my opinion. I don't think the Marlins are ready to compete for the playoffs yet, and I applaud them for realizing that and not making any moves that would affect their long-term outlook. Nonetheless, it was an underwhelming offseason for the Marlins. They're getting a D. And rounding out the NL East, the Washington Nationals are getting a C+. The Nats had their World Series hangover last year in the form of injuries to their starting pitchers. The Nationals added veteran left-handed pitcher John Lester, who himself has a ton of mileage on his arm. They also signed Kyle Schwarber to play outfield for the team, which should be an adventure. The Nationals also traded for Josh Bell from the Pittsburgh Pirates. In my opinion, the Nationals offense is just way too one-dimensional for me. They lost 2 guys in Howie Kendrick and Adam Eaton, who, despite their age, still had some speed and good bat-to-ball skills. Now, the Nationals did sign Brad Hand to be their new closer. That's a great move for the team. The Nationals were busy this offseason. I don't think it was a terrible one, but they didn't position themselves back into the conversation as World Series contenders. Moving to the National League Central, the Pirates are getting a B from me. Look, the Pirates are going to be terrible, and they realize that. And because they realized that, they traded some of their more attractive pieces in Josh Bell, Joe Musgrove, and Jameson Taillon. They got an absolute haul for Joe Musgrove going to San Diego. And they didn't do too bad in the Josh Bell or Jameson Taillon trades either. The Pirates are in a full-blown rebuild, and I applaud them for getting rid of some pieces to improve their future outlook. That being said, they're going to be terrible for at least the next 2 or maybe 3 years, so I can't give them a higher grade than a B. Next, the St. Louis Cardinals are getting an A from me this offseason. The Cardinals pulled off one of the biggest moves of the offseason when they traded for Nolan Arenado. Not only did they acquire Nolan Arenado, they also got the Rockies to kick in $50 million of cash toward his contract. They also re-signed Adam Wainwright, and in all likelihood, they'll bring back Yadier Molina as well. The Cardinals are, without a doubt, the team to beat in the National League Central, and that lineup has the ability to be elite. Next up, the Chicago Cubs are getting a C- from me this offseason. Look, this team is in a flux right now. I don't know what direction the Cubs are going in. Are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? Or are they just stuck in purgatory? And the transition from Theo Epstein to Jed Hoyer may actually not know. This offseason, the Cubs traded Yu Darvish and Victor Caratini to the San Diego Padres, and it seems like they got a light return for that package. Then they non-tendered Kyle Schwarber. But shortly after that, they signed Jock Peterson and Jake Marisnick. Meanwhile, Anthony Rizzo, Javi Baez, and Chris Bryant are all set to hit free agency next year. And so far, the Cubs have shown either no interest in trading them to get some prospects back or extending their contracts. I'm just getting mixed signals from the Cubs, and I don't really know what they're trying to do. Next up, the Cincinnati Reds are getting a D this offseason. Over the last few years, the Reds have traded for Trevor Bauer, Sonny Gray, and signed Nick Castellanos. And it appeared like they were gearing up for future playoff pushes. And now it all seems to be out the window. They let Trevor Bauer walk without even trying to re-sign him. And now it's been reported the Reds are open to shopping Luis Castillo, Sonny Gray, and Eugenio Suarez. In fact, the Reds' big addition this offseason has been relief pitcher Sean Doolittle. The Reds are right back to being a third or fourth place team in their division. The Brewers are getting a C from me this offseason. Honestly, just not much to see here. The two big moves that the Brewers have had this offseason were bringing in Colton Wong and Daniel Robertson. They still have a weak pitching staff in my opinion and really didn't add anything to that front. The Brewers still have Christian Yelich, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot of star power on that team. Let's go over to the NL West. The Padres are getting the highest grade on my list at an A+. The Padres had probably the busiest offseason in Major League Baseball. Now, that's not always synonymous with having the best offseason in baseball, as Padre fans know. But this year, the Padres struck when the iron was hot. They traded for Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, and Joe Musgrove to give them arguably the best rotation in Major League Baseball. They signed Ha-Seong Kim, Jurickson Profar, and acquired Victor Caratini as well. They also reportedly have agreed to a deal with relief pitcher Mark Melancon. And despite all of the trade activity from the Padres this offseason, they still boast one of the best farm systems in baseball. The Padres may not quite be ready to compete with the Dodgers for the National League West title, but if it's not this year, it could come as early as next year. Next up, I'm grading the Arizona Diamondbacks offseason as a D. The D, get it? D? D-backs exercised Merrill Kelly's option, who had a really strong 2020 season for the team. They've handed out a couple of minor league contracts, but really their big move was signing relief pitcher Joakim Soria. And for a team that was disappointing last year and traded Starling Marte halfway through the season, this just simply wasn't enough. Best case scenario, they'll be battling it out for third place in the NL West with the San Francisco Giants. And speaking of the San Francisco Giants, they're getting a C- this offseason. The Giants signed Anthony DeSclafani and Matt Whistler this offseason. They also added Kurt Castley, Alex Wood, and Tommy La Stella to the Major League roster. The Giants surprised a lot of teams last year and made a playoff push, but just fell short. I don't think this core is ready to compete for the playoffs in a full regular season, so good on them for not mortgaging the future for this year. But like I said, the Giants and the D-backs are probably going to be duking it out for third place in the National League West this year. Next up, the Colorado Rockies are getting a big fat F. The Rockies have the lowest grade in the National League, and that's of course because they traded superstar Nolan Arenado. Not only did the Rockies trade their franchise player, they also threw in $50 million toward his contract. I don't care what prospects the Rockies got back, they completely butchered this situation with Nolan Arenado. The Rockies will be in last place this year, you can book that. And lastly, the LA Dodgers, you already know, they're getting an A. The Dodgers didn't have a lot of room for improvement, finishing first in offense and pitching last year. Heading into this year, they still retained the best roster in Major League Baseball. And now they've added Trevor Bauer. The Dodgers are hands down the best team in the league. And if Trevor Bauer performs even close to his 2020 season, the Dodgers are going to be unstoppable. Moving over to the American League East, the New York Yankees are getting a B for this offseason. The Yankees did what they had to do and re-signed DJ LeMahieu. In fact, even got him on a cheaper deal than most expected. They then went out, signed Corey Kluber, acquired Jameson Taillon from the Pirates, and now just signed Justin Wilson. Now, while I like those moves, Corey Kluber is definitely a risk, and an expensive one at that. Kluber signed for $11 million and has thrown just 34 innings over the last 2 seasons. And the same can be said for Jameson Taillon, who's coming off 2 Tommy John surgeries. But if all goes right for those two guys, the Yankees could have one of the best rotations in baseball. If those bets don't pay off, the Yankees may have to dip into the rotation depth in Clark Schmidt and Jordan Montgomery. Next up, I'm grading the Boston Red Sox with a D this offseason. Chaim Bloom is trying to build a sustainable winner in Boston, but this offseason will not move their win total up. The Red Sox signed Hunter Renfroe, Kike Hernandez, and starting pitcher Garrett Richards. They also acquired Franchy Cordero but sent Andrew Benintendi out to Kansas City. Jackie Bradley Jr. still remains a free agent and could return to the team. But even if he does, this team doesn't look ready to compete with the Yankees, Rays, or Blue Jays for the AL East. Up next, the Toronto Blue Jays are getting an A from me this offseason. The Blue Jays signed George Springer, Marcus Semien, Kirby Yates, Tyler Chatwood, and Robbie Ray. They also were the subject of a couple different trades, including Steven Matz. The Blue Jays have a pretty solid rotation, but definitely one of the most dangerous lineups in baseball. This offseason, coupled with their young core, could have the Blue Jays ready to compete with the Rays and the Yankees for the American League East. Next up, the Tampa Bay Rays are getting a D- this offseason. The Rays let Charlie Morton walk to the Braves for $15 million. The same $15 million option that the Rays declined on Morton. Then the Rays traded Blake Snell to the San Diego Padres. And so far, it seems the Rays have not found a way to replace any of the production from their rotation. The Rays have gotten significantly weaker this offseason, and the only reason they don't get an F is because they acquired Luis Patino in the trade with the Padres. As for the Baltimore Orioles, I'm grading them a D this offseason. For the Orioles, it was another meh offseason for the team. They brought in Freddie Galvis but traded Jose Iglesias to the Angels. And that's really been the extent of their activity. They're still far off from competing in the AL East, so kudos to them for not jumping the gun on a big free agent signing or a big trade that would decimate their farm system. But overall, the Orioles need to start developing some talent and building a core because right now they have no identity. Moving to the American League Central, the worst grade on my list, the Cleveland Indians are getting an F. The Indians have the lowest grade of the offseason, and for good reason. They traded the face of the franchise, Francisco Lindor, and beloved Carlos Carrasco to the Mets for pennies on the dollar. And meanwhile, Carlos Santana is going to an in-division rival, joining the Kansas City Royals. The Indians' payroll right now is at $36.5 million. And that means Trevor Bauer will be making more than the entire Cleveland Indians roster. Sad. Next, I'm grading the Kansas City Royals a C- this offseason. Now, I've talked about the Pirates, the Marlins, and the Orioles not mortgaging their future to try to have a short-term run. The Royals are doing the exact opposite of that. They fall into the category of pretenders, and I don't think it was wise of them to try to build a team right now. Like I mentioned, they signed Carlos Santana. They also acquired Andrew Benintendi. And after those signings, where did Pacoda have them ranked in terms of win totals for 2021? 67 wins. This team is not ready to compete with the White Sox or even the Twins for the American League Central. And for those reasons, the Royals get an A for effort, but a C- for execution. Next up, I'm giving the Minnesota Twins a C this offseason. The Twins brought back the ageless Nelson Cruz to slot into their DH spot. They also signed Andrelton Simmons and Jay Happ to fill in their rotation. But they did let Eddie Rosario walk to the rival Indians, Matt Whistler go to the Giants, and reliever Trevor May to go to the Mets. Overall, the Twins still have a really good offense and a decent staff, but I don't think they're much improved from last year. The Chicago White Sox are getting a B from me this offseason. The White Sox brought in Liam Hendricks, one of the best relief pitchers in baseball this year. Great move. Then they brought in starting pitcher Lance Lynn, who's been great with the Rangers over the last 2 years. Again, great move. You know what wasn't a great move? Bringing in 76-year-old Tony La Russa to manage a young and electric team. La Russa, who hasn't managed since 2011, has been the source of controversy since his hiring. How will he adopt to analytics? How will he relate to a young generation of players whom he's 50 years their senior to? These are questions that a team on the verge of long-term dominance of their division you just wish didn't have to answer. But Jerry Reinsdorf has made his bed and now he has to lay in it. For those reasons, the Sox offseason grade goes from an A to a B. Next up, the Detroit Tigers are getting a B- from me. The Tigers, like the Pirates, are going to be bad. Really bad. They're hoping young ace Casey Mize develops into a frontline starter and the rest of that core starts to fill out around him. And because of that, the Tigers took a long-term approach to this offseason. They signed Jonathan Scope to a reasonable one-year deal who could be a trade candidate at the deadline. They also signed Wilson Ramos, who likely assumes the DH role and again could be flipped at the deadline for some prospects. They also brought in veterans Robbie Grossman and Jose Urena, who again fall under that category. Honestly, it's not much, but I don't hate it. The Tigers realize where they are in their rebuild. They made some small investments that could turn into much more if they perform well enough to be traded at the deadline. Good job, Tigers. And going to the American League West, the Angels are getting a C- this offseason. Oh, the Angels. Year in and year out, this team is deficient of starting pitching. And year in and year out, the Angels refused to address it during the offseason. The Angels were rumored to be suitors for Trevor Bauer, but even he alone wouldn't solve their issues. Now, the Angels did sign Jose Quintana and also traded for Alex Cobb. And they traded for reliever Raisel Iglesias, who will help bolster that bullpen. But all of that still won't be enough to push the Angels over the top. Masahiro Tanaka returned to Japan. Tyler Chatwood signed with the Blue Jays, and James Paxton went to the Seattle Mariners. The Angels also missed out on Corey Kluber. Tyjon Walker is still available, and I think he'd be a good addition for this team, but I just don't see the Angels going after him. Let's hope that the Angels make some moves or develop some young starting pitching before Mike Trout's out of his prime and we never get to see him deep in a playoff run. Next up, I'm grading the Houston Astros a D+ this offseason. The Astros lost George Springer to free agency this year just on the heels of losing Garrett Cole last year. There are still a few members of that core, including Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, and Carlos Correa. And they also brought back Michael Brantley, who for a moment appeared to be joining Springer in heading to Toronto. But the Astros have questions in their rotation, specifically what they're going to get from Justin Verlander, who's recovering from Tommy John surgery. They did bring in catcher Jason Castro, but for the most part remained relatively quiet and failed to address their questions in the rotation. Next up, the Texas Rangers are getting a D-. The Rangers traded Lance Lynn to the White Sox for Dane Dunning and Avery Weems. And most recently, they swapped Chris Davis for Elvis Andrus with the Athletics, which to me seems like a lateral move. Overall, the Rangers made some moves, but the loss of Lance Lynn makes this team worse than it was last year. In fact, the Rangers may fall behind the up-and-coming Seattle Mariners for last place in the American League West. And speaking of the Seattle Mariners, I'm giving them a C+ this offseason. The Mariners are trying to take the next step in their rebuild. They saw some young guys start to blossom last year, and with some strides in 2021, could be on the way to competing in 2022. The move of the offseason for the Mariners was signing James Paxton to a very team-friendly one-year contract. And if Paxton returns from injury and returns to form, he could be an ideal trade candidate for teams at the deadline. Overall, the Mariners didn't do anything earth-shattering, but they didn't do anything to deter their timeline from getting back to competing. And lastly, the Oakland Athletics are getting a D- this offseason. The A's did basically nothing. They lost Liam Hendricks to the Chicago White Sox. They lost Marcus Semien to the Blue Jays. And Robbie Grossman and Mike Minor both left the team as well. The Athletics, just like the Tampa Bay Rays, always seem to have a sum greater than their total parts. That being said, I don't think this team has the chops to compete for AL supremacy with the Yankees, Blue Jays, and White Sox. The only thing this Athletics offseason leaves me wondering is if Matt Chapman is getting traded next. So there you guys have it. Those are all my grades for the MLB offseason. What do you guys think? Who did I grade too harsh and who did I grade too high? What did your team grade out and do you agree with it? And who do you think had the best offseason and the worst offseason in 2021?